Hi, welcome to Face Toward Zion. How is your scripture study? Do you wish you could do better? I'd like to take a few minutes and discuss ideas for improving scripture study and what it takes to develop a scripture study game plan. I'd like to begin with a personal story. I once interviewed for a position that was driven by technology. During the interview, that topic came up. I remember very distinctly the hiring manager looking me directly in my eyes and asking, "What is your game plan for staying on the leading edge of technology?" Of course, your mind races when asked such a question, and I remember thinking, what do you mean by a game plan? Do you mean, do I have a strategy, and is this something I've ever even thought about? Of course, my answer contained a few things I was doing and some general theories on how to stay on the leading edge. I guess he liked my answer because I did get the job. But I've often thought about that question. Do you have a game plan? We all know that scripture study is important. How would you respond if you were asked, what is your game plan for scripture study? I once attended a Know Your Religion series on the Book of Mormon. I really enjoyed that class. I thought the instructor was brilliant. He would often give insights into the Book of Mormon that I had never heard of before. After the last class, I went up to him and told him how much I appreciated the series. I then told him that someday I would love to be able to understand the scriptures like he did. I asked him if he would have any ideas on how to improve my studies. He seemed to hem and haw for a second or two, probably the same way I did when asked for my game plan on staying on the leading edge of technology. He initially said that it just takes a lot of time and a lot of prayer, but then he hesitated for a moment. I think the Spirit whispered to him and he blurted out, the rule of threes. I asked him what he meant by that. He explained that when you read a chapter of Scripture, to read it 3 times consecutively. He said you would gain additional insights by reading the chapter 3 times. One year I decided to study the Book of Mormon and I decided to try the rule of threes. What I found was the first time I would read the chapter, I would begin to understand who was involved and what happened. The second time I read, I no longer needed to know the storyline since I had just read it. What I found was that word patterns would begin to emerge. I would see why the chapter was constructed the way it was and what were the circumstances that prompted that response. Then I found that the third time I would read the chapter would just become alive. It was no longer just a story, but real people that confronted real issues. I would see how to confront similar problems that was happening in my life at the time. I learned that if you really want to begin to understand the scriptures, read them with the rule of threes. When I was in high school, my older sister went to Brigham Young University. She would come home on weekends and tell me about the Doctrine and Covenants class she was taking and how much she enjoyed that class. She was taking it from a professor named Leon Otten. One thing he would do is he had a title for each section. Then, when you went to any section, by knowing the title, you could quickly remember what that section was all about. As I was reading the Book of Mormon, I remembered that the instructor I liked so well would often say that this chapter could be titled, and then he would give the title for that chapter. I decided to give each chapter in the Book of Mormon a title. Usually by the first or second time I had read the chapter, I could come up with a title. When I compared it with my notes from my Know Your Religion seminar, I would realize that my title was not near as profound as that given by the instructor. For example, early in the Book of Mormon, in 1 Nephi chapter 8, I titled this chapter as Lehi's Vision of the Tree of Life. I thought this was a good title as you can quickly remember what the chapter is about. But my instructor had titled it The Vision of the Pattern of an Eternal Family. Wow, I thought that was pretty deep. So what's a better title? As I thought about this, I thought that my title told the overview of the chapter while his told its true meaning. As I pondered this, it came to me that my title was telling the means of the chapter, while his title was telling the ends. So I decided to give each chapter 2 titles, one the means and the other the ends. So the means will briefly describe the storyline, while the ends will tell what the chapter is teaching me. I found that some chapters were difficult. For example, 1 Nephi chapter 19. In this chapter, Nephi talks about the different plates and how on the small plates he wrote what was sacred to him. He then tells us to liken the scriptures to yourself. So I gave the means title to be Liken the Scriptures to Yourself. For the ends, I thought Nephi was telling stories that were important to him. I initially titled it Things Important to Nephi, but that title just didn't sound right. As I thought about it, I thought of the phrase, these are a few of my favorite things. You may recognize that phrase from The Sound of Music, so I just gave it the title, A Few of My Favorite Things. What I found is that trying to find the titles of a chapter helps you understand what the meaning of the chapter is all about. So an idea for scripture study would be to title the chapters, and even try titles for the means and the ends. We all have our favorite set of scriptures that over the years we have marked up with the insights we've received. An idea for studying the scriptures is to take these comfortable set of scriptures and set them aside. Get a new copy and read from an unmarked set. You may not feel comfortable at first doing this, but what you will find is since your last set of scriptures, they have added new things in the scriptures. Of course, all the words are the same, but what happens when you read your set of scriptures is that your eyes are drawn to the markings. You will remember old things that you have learned. There are new things that you need to learn, and by not having your previously markings, those new things are now not hid. You will gain new insights. I always leave one set of scriptures as unmarked. If I want to mark the scriptures, I'll go back to my old comfortable set and mark them. You can also put your insights into electronic scriptures. We will talk about that in a few minutes. One thing integral to scriptural study is to spend the time in the scriptures. Suppose you went to a conference and at that conference they gave you a tool to get good returns from the stock market. Suppose they said if you spent an hour a day learning this tool, then the next year you would be guaranteed to make $1 million, and you could continue to do that every year for the rest of your life. If you knew this to be true, could you find an hour a day to learn that tool? Now, what if I told you that if you spent an hour a day studying the scriptures, that eternally you would be more wealthy than all the money that's currently in the world? If you knew that to be true, could you find an hour a day? I was in a meeting once where the bishop told a story of a time in his life when he was struggling. Due to work pressures and problems in his home, he just didn't know how to handle things. He said that one day as he was sitting in sacrament meeting, they began to sing the song Secret Prayer. The words of the first verse hit home to him. It says, "There is an hour of peace and rest, unmarred by earthly care. 'Tis when before the Lord I go, and kneel in secret prayer." He said that the Spirit whispered to him and said that he needed to find an hour a day where he could study the scriptures and kneel in secret prayer. He was so busy he didn't know how he could find that much time. So he began to wake early, and he found an hour in the day. He said it wasn't long before he felt the peace that he needed and received the answers for his life. Can we find an hour a day? It seems like there are always those times when we read the scriptures that we just can't understand them. Even reading them multiple times, they just don't seem to make sense. There's a time and a place for scripture commentaries. Get good books from authors that you trust and read along. Often they can explain difficult passages. With that being said, treat commentaries as you do your own marked scriptures. Don't let them force your thinking. Continue to ponder the scriptures on your own. Also, one thing I have found with commentaries is to read the footnotes and the bibliographies. If an author constantly references a certain work, then go get that work and read those insights from that source. You will find that that source will often take you to another and then another and then another, and there are often endless resources for studying the scriptures. Use them wisely. There will still be times that you don't understand something. One way to help is to look at how you are interpreting that verse. If you are looking at something in a literal way, then try to look at it as being figurative or even vice versa. See if that makes a difference. Often we take things very literally when they are meant to be taken figuratively. Try looking at it in a different way. Sometimes that works. Some chapters are difficult because they're written in a chiasm. That is a prophetic form where they would say something and then repeat it, often in reverse order. For example, the phrase, "the first shall be last and the last shall be first." Here they use the same words, first and last, but they reverse the order. Throughout our studies we will highlight this form. This year we will be studying the Book of Mormon. Even the title page is written in a chiasm. If you still don't understand, ask others. Use the Sunday school hour to ask questions. Often someone will know the answer. And finally, don't give up. Ask the Lord about it. Be very specific. Say, "I am having trouble with this one verse or this one book," and then quote it if necessary, and then listen. However, answers often come in different ways. Sometimes you may get the answer immediately. Other times the answer may come in the middle of the night or while you are driving. You may want to have something handy to write down your impression, but always be receptive regardless of the circumstance. You also have to be patient. Sometimes it may take years until you receive an answer, but don't give up. Remember the story of the importuning widow. See Luke 18 if we need a refresher. Another idea to improve scripture study is to select a key verse and memorize it. If you are following the Come Follow Me readings, and every week you will have verses from 1 to 7 chapters to choose from. Select a verse that has meaning to you and memorize it. During the course of the week, think about that verse on your way to work or the store. You'll be surprised how easy it is to memorize over the course of a week. Also, take that verse and look at it in commentaries or other scriptures. If you like that verse, chances are that others have liked it as well. Also, utilize the power of electronic scriptures. At your fingertips, you have the power to search across all scriptures and even conference talks or manuals. Learn to utilize those tools. On Face Towards Zion, there's a video titled Harnessing the Power of Electronic Scriptures. That can give you insights on how to use electronic scriptures. Especially valuable are tags and notebooks. And finally, you need to use proper mechanics. If you have distracting things going on around you, then there is no way you can have the Spirit teach you. However, if you concentrate, it is amazing what you can learn in difficult circumstances. You can learn a lot while on a bus or in a crowded airport. Begin with prayer. Pour out your heart to the Lord and listen. It's hard to listen if we're always talking. When you read, look at keywords. Often words are used for a reason. Look them up if you don't know what they mean. Use the tag feature in electronic scriptures to look at that word across multiple books. If you're not sure, tag it. The use of keywords becomes clear over time. The most important thing is to listen to the Spirit. Always be ready whenever the Spirit talks. Use a scriptural journal. Oftentimes we think we need a fancy journal with prompts before we can write down our thoughts. Often a blank notebook is all you really need. And finally, end with prayer. Thank the Lord for the insights you have received, and again, be specific. Everything you say doesn't have to begin with, I thank thee or I ask thee. Just say, here's what I've learned and this is what I still have questions about. He really will talk with you. With all of these ideas, it's now time to establish a game plan. Here are some guidelines. First of all, write it down. Then in your game plan, include a provision for that week when you get super busy and everything goes wrong. Remember, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Also, keep going. You know there'll be times when you get discouraged. Just keep going. And finally, share your game plan with those that you love. There's power in sharing and committing to a plan. So how do you establish the game plan? The first step is to just start. Grab a piece of paper or open Word. At the top of it, just type in 2020 Scripture Game Plan. Then you're ready to begin. Step 2. You will want to set up your game plan for both individual study and for the family. Begin with these two sections. First, concentrate on your individual game plan. You will want to make a game plan that is SMART. The word SMART is an acronym standing for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. You want to begin with an annual goal. So an example would be, this year I will read the Book of Mormon, following the Come Follow Me outline. Then you want to take that goal and break it into steps. Weekly is good. An example, each week I will study the assigned readings for 5 hours. Watch at least one Come Follow Me video each week. I may recommend a Face Towards Zion. And follow along with one commentary on the assigned chapters. Make it process as well. While studying, I will begin with prayer. Read each chapter 3 times. Mark my electronic scriptures with notes, tags, etc. Ponder the reading sometimes during the day, while driving, during lunch, etc. Pick one verse from this week's reading to memorize. And end with prayer. Specifically mention one doctrinal point just studied. You want to include a provision for if you fail one specific week. So include, if I miss a week, I will just read the material and begin studying the next week's material. And then you move on. The game plan for your family will be a little different. You don't want to set up the game plan for your family. It is your family's role to do that. You can, however, organize a family home evening. If necessary, you can begin by playing this video, and then, together as a family, you develop your family game plan. You will still want to structure the game plan with an annual goal, such as this year we will read the Book of Mormon, following the Come Follow Me outline, and then break it up into smaller pieces. Each day we will read the Book of Mormon as a family for 20 minutes. You may want to add a time on that. You may want to put on it, we will do this at 6:30 every morning, or we will do this at 8:30 p.m. as we get ready for bed. Also include each week. Each week on Sunday, we will hold a third-hour study group where we will discuss and apply what we have learned. This hour will include a review from the previous week on how we applied those lessons in our lives. It's very powerful to sit down with a family and talk about the previous week's lesson. What did they do different? Talk about this week. What are the lessons that we've learned? How can we apply what we've learned? What are the means and the ends of this week's lesson? What was my favorite verse from this week? And what's an insight that I've learned from this week's lesson? Congratulations, you now have a family game plan. Now begins the hard part, executing on the game plan and making it happen. Remember some lessons from the temple. You may have to sacrifice to make this happen. Regardless how well your plan is laid out, you have to be obedient to make it happen. This process is what it means to consecrate yourself and your family to the Lord. Finally, I'd like to close with the teachings of Russell M. Nelson. As president of the Quorum of the 12, in the priesthood session in April 2016, he talked about paying the price for priesthood power. While he talks about the priesthood, this talk is for everyone. We all need the Lord's power. President Nelson's formula included prayer and temple attendance as well as scripture study, but we have to be willing to pay the price in order to receive the blessings. May we pay the price in scripture study.
Why would any man waste his days and settle for Esau's mess of pottage when he has been entrusted with the possibility of receiving all of the blessings of Abraham? I urgently plead with each one of us to live up to our privileges as bearers of the priesthood. In a coming day, only those men who have taken their priesthood seriously by diligently seeking to be taught by the Lord himself will be able to bless, guide, protect, strengthen, and heal others. Only a man who has paid the price for priesthood power will be able to bring miracles to those he loves and keep his marriage and family safe now and throughout eternity.